iAfrica.com has completed its acquisition of South Africa's oldest news portal from Primedia and MTN. The acquisition of iAfrica will push the South African media platform to expand its global reach and develop the brand's content. Africa.com chairman and CEO Teresa Clarke, who will serve as the executive editor of iAfrica, spoke to Arnold Segawa earlier on, and this is what she had to say about the prospects.
Time to speak to us, Teresa. Just walk us through the deal. What don't we know?
Well, we're very excited to have acquired iAfrica. As you know, it's been one of South Africa's leading portals since the 1990s, one of the very first news portals. It benefited in its early days and still today through its affiliation with the email addresses at iAfrica.com. So many people who log in to check their email each day on iAfrica.com come to our news portal as a default homepage. And so that's a tremendous opportunity to speak to the South African audience.
Right. You do have arguably the best URL on the continent, without a doubt, hands down. How much pressure do you actually feel from news providers and portals and platforms that are arguably doing the same thing that you have been doing for quite a while, but they are not based on the continent? How much pressure are you feeling right now from them?
Well, I think that we've always tried to distinguish ourselves from the local news portals in each of the 54 countries in Africa. We have positioned Africa.com to be the second source that you look at after you understand what's happening in your country. You're going to want to increasingly have a sense of what's happening across the continent, and you're not going to read 54 newspapers. So we've positioned Africa.com to keep our readers smart about Africa, because we curate the 10 most important stories across the continent. And that's what Africa.com's editorial voice has been. iAfrica is quite different, because iAfrica is the primary source of news for South Africans who want to understand local news in South Africa as well as global news.
Why now?
Why now? Yeah. To be honest with you, it was just offered to us, and we'd looked at doing a couple of other acquisitions in the past, and so our team was quite experienced in being able to do due diligence and analyze what would make a good acquisition for us. And so when this opportunity was presented to us, we were in a good position to move and act quickly, and we were very pleased to have that opportunity.
I'm going through the release here, and it is very clear you are going to be the executive director for iAfrica too. And what happens to the iAfrica employees? Are we going to see more consolidations and jobs lost? What certainty do we have here?
When you look at the way iAfrica was run, it was part of Primedia. So Primedia had a lot of business development people, infrastructure, technology that they were using, and we as Africa.com are now just stepping into the shoes of iAfrica. So I'm sorry, of Primedia. So the editorial staff that came with it are all still employed by us.
Right. Any strong suits that you might want to borrow from whatever iAfrica has been doing? What actually stands out here? Why did you sign that dotted line, to say the least?
iAfrica has a tremendously loyal user base. That's one thing that's fantastic about iAfrica. There are people who go to iAfrica many times a day and have been doing so since the late 1990s. The iAfrica user base is among the most loyal that we've seen in our properties, other properties. It's really quite an amazing group of people who really follow that site very closely.
I love that you actually do refer to the 90s, because news provision and, well, should I say, dissemination has evolved from then till now. And my question would be, right now we are seeing a lot of paywalls coming up. Is this a medium that you've actually looked into going forward for revenue generation?
Of course we have, although we have not decided that we could get there. I think that in order to be, like you look at the New York Times, for example, it's taken quite a bit for them to be able to achieve a paywall. The Guardian has been able to do that. We haven't really seen African media able to do that yet. But I think that that's one of the benefits of iAfrica coming into our stable, is that we have a very effective network of publishers that we work with in order to sell advertising. And so we'll now bring them into that group. In addition to that, we have started with content syndication. And so Africa.com syndicates its content across this portfolio of 50 other publishers. We'll do the same with the content that's produced on iAfrica, and that produces an opportunity to earn revenue as well.
Teresa, one thing that actually really stands out for me is the magnitude of the South African economy. Well, South Africa and Nigeria together do account for at least 40% of the GDP on the continent. And my question would be, wouldn't you, is this a sort of a move to consolidate your presence as Africa.com on a continent in the biggest powerhouses? Is it a move to actually consolidate your presence?
Absolutely. I think if you take a look at what's happening with local media, whether in Africa or anywhere throughout the world today, it's increasingly difficult to stand alone because we have the two big ones in the room, Google and Facebook, who have taken the advertising revenue away from local media everywhere, not just in Africa, but everywhere. So in order to survive, we need to have greater consolidation because it's just not easy to stand alone.
Do you have any other tools, any other remedies for the big boys who are actually running away with lots of the revenues?
Yeah. Do I have any remedies for them?
Yeah.
Advice for Google and Facebook?
No, ways to counter them.
Ways to counter them.
Yeah.
I think that what's really been nice for us, as we have been out talking to some of the ad agencies in South Africa about the acquisition, it's been really refreshing to see how many of the advertisers recognize that if they want to still have local media, they've got to allocate some of their budget to local media. And that's not just us talking. I think the advertisers are recognizing, I mean, especially when you think about context and where ads are placed. There's a context aspect to it. And so when you see a global brand advertising on a very micro local website, even smaller than ours, a small blog, it says something different to the reader about how that brand connects with them than just using the global media. And so I think that they're seeing that the connection, the advertisers are finding that there's more effectiveness when they work on local media, and everything has become very computerized with algorithms to try to figure out what you're going to do. Retargeting, you look at one website and later in the day you see an ad from that website from an e-commerce perspective. And while there's a certain effectiveness through all of that, we sometimes forget what this is all about. And at the end of the day, readers go to sites in order to connect with content that they care about, and the advertisers want to speak to them in a language and place that's comfortable.